For those of you just connecting to audio, my name's Frida. If you missed it, I'm going to be hosting this awesome, making sweet medicine class with Suzanna Stone tonight. I'm super excited about it, as you all probably are too, because sweet medicine is awesome and delicious. So yay, welcome so much. If you want to say hi in the chat, let us know where you're coming in from. That'd be awesome. We're excited to see you here. And yeah, we'll get started. Susanna is here with us. She's in the kitchen there. You can see at the top of the screen, or at least the top of my screen. Susanna is the founder and director of Owlcraft Healing Ways in Scottsville, Virginia. It's an outdoor herb school where she offers clinical herbal consultation and leads in-depth community and clinical apprenticeships, herb camps for kids, and workshops in herbal medicine, traditional foodways, and plant spirit medicine. There's a lot going on there. She's also the co-founder and co-director of the Gaia Gathering for Women in Charlottesville, Virginia, and she stewards 14 acres of plant-filled land to provide sanctuary, healing, and accessible education for all who hear the call of plants. So yay, welcome, Susanna. One more thing before we start. If you have a question that you have, throw it into the chat with a Q, and I will catch it. We're going to save all the questions till the very end. We'll have about 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, and I will ask your questions. So yay, welcome, Susanna, and welcome everybody who's coming in and saying hi and where you're from, and yay. Okay, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I am super excited and happy to share this. Making syrups is, I think, one of the most accessible, easy, delicious ways to start incorporating herbal medicine into your daily rhythm. It's wonderful, not just when you're acutely sick. And that's why I really love the kind of variety that we're going to be making together tonight, where you have ones you can take when you're sick, you have ones that are going to work with specific things, and then ones that you really can kind of just have fun with. So we're going to be making 3 different syrups, and we're going to go a little bit quickly through them this evening, but you have the handout. My email is on, or my website's on the handout, which my email you can find there. So if you have questions, you're always welcome to shoot me an email about it. We're going to make an antiviral syrup, which is a little bit of a twist on your regular elderberry syrup. We're also going to make a Nourishing Nervy syrup, which is one of my favorite formulas that I've done. And then we're going to make a blood building syrup. So they're all going to be just a little bit different, but kind of starting off the bat, because yes, you can look for recipes, which are great to follow, but really what I like to encourage people to do is to understand the actual process of what making a syrup is. And then you can kind of look at the needs you have, or you can look at the plants that are really accessible to you in this moment, seasonally, or anything like that, and formulate your own syrups or come up with your own ideas and just be really creative. I find it really empowering to understand that process and kind of step a little bit away from just purely following recipes. So kind of just an overview. A syrup is, we're taking you can use fresh plants, you can use dried plants. The proportions that I'm giving you tonight are for dried plant material. I wanted to keep it where, if say you didn't have access to fresh plant, you can still get some and make these medicines. So you're taking dried plant material and you're making a decoction. And a decoction is when you're reducing the volume by half. So I always like to think about, well, what's a concoction? A concoction is you're putting a bunch of stuff together, right? So a decoction is you're pulling stuff away. And so you're reducing that volume by half. So you're making a concentrated tea. And then you're taking honey, or we're also going to be using molasses. Sometimes people will use sugar. That's like a real old-time Appalachian style of doing it. We're not going to be doing, sugar tonight, but that is something that is used. And you're making your syrup with that. And then you don't have to add alcohol. We'll talk about different ways and kind of ideas to preserve it without doing that. I'll add a little bit of alcohol, and that extends the life. It needs to be refrigerated because Honey is antimicrobial until you add water, then it becomes the perfect medium for fermentation. So if you don't have some way of either refrigerating it, freezing it, or you're going to use it in a quicker time, you want to add something that's going to help preserve it. So that's kind of what a syrup is. Here's your basic recipe. Now you guys all have your handouts, right? So your handout has your recipes on it. That's great, okay? Your basic syrup recipe is you're using 1 ounce of dried plant material for every 2 cups of water. So if you're starting out with a quart of syrup, right, then you're going to start off with 4 cups of water and 2 ounces of dried plant material, right? The honey you're going to use either 3/4 to 1 cup of honey for every 2 cups of decoction. So 3/4 to 1 cup of honey or molasses for every 2 cups of your decoction or herb. And then you're going to use about 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup of brandy for every 3 to 4 cups of syrup. So about 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup of brandy for every 3 to 4 cups of your finished syrup. That's your basic syrup recipe, like the amounts, right? And then we'll talk about all the different ways. I'm going to go through and talk about each syrup and just talk a little bit about the plants. And then we're not going to spend the time decocting them because we don't have enough time tonight together, but I cooking shows styled it for all y'all and made them already. So it'll be really fun because we look, they're already made. Couple of tools you'll need is you'll need a good heavy bottom saucepan, you know, something that's not aluminum or really lightweight. You don't want to really cook your medicine in aluminum. And you want to have a good digital scale, right? Help you figure out your ounces. Now, here's another thing that, yes, I just gave you all these recipes in ounces and parts and all of that. You can also approach this like you're making soup, and you can do it visually. You can just say, I'm going to put a handful of this in. I encourage you to get comfortable with how the flavors shift and change for you. Pay attention to how much an ounce, like if you're going to be making a lot of the antiviral syrup, pay attention to, well, how much was that ounce? Was it a handful? Was it a 1/4 cup? Was it 4 tablespoons? You know, pay attention, and then you can just like get a little more comfortable and be just making it with less tools. Okay. Okay, so the antiviral syrup is, elderberry syrup is everywhere these days, right? Well, not everywhere, but we're all plant people, so it's kind of everywhere. And it's such an incredible ally to have on hand to be able to make it yourself. You know, if you go to a health food store, it's fairly expensive, right? So like the sambucol and stuff like that, it's going to be much more affordable if you can do it yourself, right? And what I like about this one is it's not just straight elderberry. And I learned adding sumac from herbalist Phyllis Light, who is in Alabama. And she's a really wonderful herbalist. And I just like to give her a shout out because she's who really turned me on many, many, many years ago to my deep and abiding love for sumac berries. I'm in Virginia, and so it might not be accessible for everybody. It's not one that is easily found in commerce. So what I do tell people is sumac is powdered and often used in Middle Eastern cooking. And so you can often find it powdered at Middle Eastern stores. And if you strain it well, you can use the powder in place of just the berries in your syrup. So this elderberry syrup has equal parts of elderberries and sumac berries, and then it has cinnamon chips. Sometimes I'll switch up the cinnamon chips during flu season for star anise, and I'll tell you why when we get to that part, okay? And so we are going to, I'm trying to think if I want to measure this out for y'all or not. So we're going to take 4 cups of water. So we would be taking our candy saucepan and we would add 4 cups of water. And then in a separate bowl, I would be weighing out like 1 ounce of elderberries, which looks, can you see how much that is, y'all? It's probably about a 1/4 cup, right? So it's not a whole lot. So it's a 1/4 cup of elderberries. And I'm gonna just put it back because I really don't need to like measure all of these out because I've already decocted them. And then if you're not familiar, so let me talk about the medicine of elder. I got carried away. So elderberry is the botanical name. I like to offer botanical names because they do provide a standard commonality. So we all know that we're talking kind of about the same plant, because certain plants regionally will share the same common name, but actually be different plants. Queen of the Meadow is an example of that. So meadowsweet and joe pye are both called Queen of the Meadow, and they're different plants. So I do like to offer botanical names for that. So elder, Sambucus nigra. In Virginia, we have Sambucus nigra species canadensis. And the part that we're using is the berry. And the berry is so incredibly helpful and supportive for the immune system. It's very stimulating for the immune system. It really can help prevent and resolve any kind of cold and flu issues. And I really like it's helpful for just really building your resilience. And so I often encourage people to begin taking elderberry syrup like 4 weeks before we kind of get into that seasonal shift and seasonal transition where, cold and flu starts to become a little bit more present. We've had such an unusual year with, the pandemic and, because everyone was masked, I find like cold and flu symptoms weren't as much. But as soon as stuff started to open up a little, I've been seeing a lot of upper respiratory infections going around that aren't COVID related. So, I think that we're just kind of dealing with it now. We haven't had to for a while. So elderberry is a great ally for it. And I will tell you what, the elderberry in Virginia, I'm in Central Virginia, actually all over. I was just traveled up to New England and saw it all up and down the whole East Coast that we were driving on. And I have not seen so much elderberry in years. I mean, it is just incredibly abundant. And I always pay attention to what plants am I seeing in abundance, because they show up before we need them so that we can have our time to prep and make our medicines. It's like they know and they arrive and they are there. And if you pay attention and really like settle into that deep observation, you can see, oh, I need to be making a lot of elder medicine. So this is a great way of making elder medicine, is to make this syrup. So we have our elderberry, and then we have our sumac. Now, sumac is one of my just beloved plant loves. It's a rose species. So yes, it's in the same kind of like family as poison ivy. Now, it's not poison sumac. Poison sumac berries never turn red. They always stay white. But if you go down, a lot of times you'll see it growing in, do you see that? This is from winged sumac. So it drapes and hangs a little more. And it likes waste areas. It likes to grow along the roadsides. You'll see 3 different kinds. You'll see one that's really fuzzy, that is staghorn sumac. I call it the stuffed animal of the herbal world, because it's literally, the berries are plush and they're very tight and the cones are a little smaller. And then we have smooth sumac, which is beautiful red clusters. And then we have winged sumac. And so those just RHUS, the roost species of sumac. Sumac, and we're going to be using this in another syrup tonight too. Sumac is incredibly tonifying and astringent. And what it does is it tonifies the kind of the mucous membranes, and it like makes your pathways for your fluids to flow. So it's not necessarily drying up the fluids so much as it's helping them flow in your body in a really appropriate way. And it's so fantastic for, when you're first getting like sick and you might feel that post nasal drip and you're like, oh, I have this really bad sore throat. Sumac can ease that and actually prevent it from kind of ever taking hold. And sumac and elder in combination, they just work really well together. It's like they communicate. They're just like, yeah, we're not doing this. We are getting people better. And so I always, as much as I can, I put sumac with my elderberry. Now, if you cannot find sumac, just double your elderberry for the recipe. It's fine. That's really what most people are doing anyways, is they're just making elderberry, right? We're just making it a little bit better and yummier. And the sumac has this really bright flavor, and it's a little tart, it's a little sour, and it cuts a little bit of the kind of like a little cloying sweetness that sometimes I find elderberry syrup can have. So we're going to use an ounce of the sumac also. And if you're harvesting sumac, which you know, because it is not easy to find, I've always thought a great idea would be to start a sumac farm because it's such incredible medicine. So please, somebody do that so we can have it available readily. If you're going to harvest sumac yourself, you want to wait till the berries are really red, and of course do all of your work and make sure that you're harvesting in a good, ethical way, that you are familiar with the land and you have done your work to make sure you're not taking somebody else's medicine. You know, that's an entire class and workshop on its own. So look up good wildcrafting practices. And you don't want to harvest after it's rained for about 2 days because these constituents in sumac are really water soluble. So you really want that medicine in there. And you also want to harvest before the frost because the medicine changes after the frost. So sumac in Virginia is a late summer into early fall harvest. Sumac will never feel dry to the touch. It always has a little bit of resin on the berries. And the way I know sumac is dried enough for me to pack it up, and often in Virginia, I'll store things in paper bags in case it gets a little humid so it doesn't have condensation in glass jars, and then I'll add as needed to my jars. I leave them whole on the cones, except for staghorn sumac because it's so tight, they get a lot of bugs in there, so I'll break that one apart. You're gonna snap the stem on your sumac. And if that stem snaps and is dry and brittle, that's how you know that your sumac is dried enough to store. So that's kind of what you're looking for, because the berries will always, that means you have good medicine if the berries are staying resinous, okay? So then we're gonna add just 2 teaspoons of cinnamon chips. We're just adding enough cinnamon because we want to warm this formula up a little, right? So elderberry and sumac are both energetically cold. We're going to put a little bit of cinnamon. It's going to help it taste really good. Cinnamon also brings, you know, kind of circulation to the extremities, and it helps open the channels for the rest of the medicine to really go in and do the work that it needs to do. Now, when we're really heading into cold and flu season, I will often put star anise in there instead. Star anise is where one of the constituents that they make Tamiflu from comes from. And so it's got like shikimic acid in it, and it's really helpful ally, again, for working with colds and flus and building the immune system.
Suzanna, we're at 20.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to start heating up our elderberry decoction. So here's what we've done. We've had 4 cups of water. We've had our herbs put in there. Now, this is what is a fantastic tip, is you're gonna take a chopstick, right? And so whenever you get like anywhere that they have like takeout chopsticks or something, grab some extra and use them. And you're gonna take this chopstick and put it right in the water and in your plant material, and then take a pencil and mark the level of liquid, right? And then you are going to check that, and you're gonna like have it go till about just above half. So you'll put it in there and be like, pull it out and be like, okay, we're just about half. You want to allow some space for, you know, the fact that the plant material is in there is causing some extra displacement. But that's how you can measure your decoction and make sure that you're decocting it down by half. It's okay if you don't get it exact, but you want to get at least within like a quarter at the most, but an 1/8 of a cup of the decoction. and make sure you have good medicine. And you're going to be cooking this on, and it's in your handout, but you're going to be cooking it on, you know, about medium. You don't want it boiling like crazy, but you don't want it doing nothing. I like just a steady simmer. And pay attention. Pay attention to what it feels like when you're making medicine. Remember that you're making medicine. So sometimes you can get really distracted and then you come back and you boiled your whole syrup down to nothing. So you don't want that to happen. So this cooking style is going to be across the board for all of your syrups. You're going to add the water, you're going to add your plant material, you're going to use your chopstick, you're going to measure, you're going to cook it like, you know, slowly. Usually it's about an hour, hour and a half to like kind of slowly cook it down. The reason you want to do it slowly is you want to give time for that medicine to really extract in there. You're not going to cover it because, like I said, you're trying to like cook it down, right? So you want some kind of that evaporation to be happening. And once it is reduced, I'll let it cool a little bit just because it's a little easier to work with a decoction that's cooled when you're straining it. I'll strain it through a fine mesh strainer, and make sure you get a fine mesh one. I don't know if you can see, but there are mesh strainers and then there are fine mesh. And for medicine making, you want a fine mesh strainer. It really does make a big difference, and it makes it so you don't have to strain through cheesecloth. And so then I'll measure how much I have, and that lets me know exactly how much honey to add. So we have our 2 cups of decoction, and I'm just going to reheat this. And then we're going to move on. And as this is reheating, we're going to move on and talk about the next syrup. And then we'll come back to it and we'll add the honey and finish it up. So our next syrup that we're going to be making is our Nourishing Nervy syrup. And this is one that is just so delicious. This is the one that you're just going to drink every day. This is going to be the one. I love taking syrups and putting them in sparkling water or adding them on top of like pancakes or biscuits and cream, anything like that. Like, you really can incorporate these as kind of like delicious food themes. I know I've had people get syrups from me because they were having a party and they wanted like an herbal cocktail bar. And so they would have all different kinds of syrups that they would mix into like cocktails or mocktails. So you can kind of get really fun with it and be like, yeah, you're getting medicine. So you're all at a party. Here, have some Nervines. So the Nourishing Nervine is, you'll notice that it has a little bit more water in it, and that's because I wanted to add more plants to it. So I wanted to add more plants, but I didn't want to reduce the amount and like have it, oh, I'm having a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So I was like, well, I'm just going to make a bigger amount of syrup to begin with. And because of knowing like working in parts, like I've made like literal huge canning, like bathing, what do they call those? Like the giant canning pots full of syrup before. And you know, it takes a really long time to be cocked, but you can like make it whatever size you want. So the Nourishing Nervine syrup has milky oats as its real foundation. And milky oats, Avena sativa, is like, we grow it on the land. It's a big part of the apprenticeship as we journey through planting the oats and harvesting the oats and making oat medicine and really like sitting with it. And I just love it. It is absolute food for the nervous system. The botanical name is Avena sativa, and it is what our oatmeal comes from, right? So it's just deeply nourishing. It has, it's really high in minerals. Minerals are calming in the body. The more nutrition you have, the more able you are to really go out in the world. And I find oats so supportive for nervous exhaustion, for when you just feel like you're kind of walking on that last thin thread, when you feel frazzled, when you just need support. And if you can ever have the experience, the part we're using is the green top, and you harvest it at the milky stage. So when you squeeze it, this like incredible milk comes out. I call it earth milk, and it's like the savory version of honeysuckle to me. So it's like, you know, people will go to honeysuckle and pick it and suck the nectar. I'm out there with the oat field, like sucking all the little, like, you know, milky oat part from it every year. We just did the oat harvest last weekend. And here in Virginia, it rains every single time it's time to harvest oats for the 14 years I've been growing them. So that's fun. But milky oats is you can dry it for tea, but if you're making a tincture, it's a fresh plant medicine. And it is just premier for nervous exhaustion, feeling frazzled, feeling like you need nutritional support. And sometimes when people are at that level of nervous exhaustion, it's very difficult to have people be able to eat sometimes and to get enough nourishment. And so until they can get to that point, I often will encourage, well, let's have as many of these kind of like nourishing teas as you can. So at least then you're getting your vitamins, you're getting your minerals, you're getting some like nourishing support. So this is foundation of this syrup. And then we have Linden, and the Linden here is just beginning to flower. And if you want to see the most amazing bees and just aroma, be by a Linden tree. Linden is the Tilia species. It's just incredible medicine. So it's also has been known as lime trees. And like if you read like any kind of like Victorian type literature, they're always promenading down the avenue lined with lime trees or drinking their lime water. When I was younger, I was always like, why do they have lime trees and like, you know, on the heath in England? And then, or like, I realized like, oh, these people were like talking about Linden. It took me, you know, until I was a little bit older. But I love Linden really for working with irritable anxiety, for anxiety that manifests in irritable nervousness when your heart is racing and you're just feeling like really like you can't handle it. You just kind of want to retreat because it's physically feeling like too much. It's very calming and it's really a sweet calming kind of. And so it pairs well with the oats, where the oats is supportive and restoring and working with that frazzle. And then the Linden is coming in and working with that kind of like super irritable nervous anxiety, where people are like, what's wrong with her? And you're like, I'm just stressed out. But it's hard to articulate that. So Linden is your key for that. And it's super delicious. And then we're going to have Rosa species. Any rose you can use. It doesn't have to be Rosa rugosa, which is our wild rose here, or the dog rose. Any kind of rose you can use as long as it's not sprayed. You want to check roses are a really heavily sprayed crop, so you really don't want to be like, oh, I got this beautiful dozen roses from this florist. I'll save the petals and make medicine, because chances are they're probably really heavily sprayed to get them to that florist, unless you've gotten, you know, organic ones. And you want to make sure that they have an aroma, you know. So we were just up in New England in this like town lined with roses everywhere. And of course there were the amazing Rosa rugosa and then the pasture roses that had all this incredible just aroma. It was in the air. But then we would also walk by houses that beautiful roses, but they had no aroma. They had no scent to them. And so whatever rose you use, you want to make sure it's not sprayed and that there is a scent to it, okay? Now, rose is cooling and it opens the heart. And I love the medicine of rose, where rose has thorns, but it's this deep, deep heart medicine. Because to be able to walk out into the world with an open heart, you need to be able to also have really wonderful, good, supportive, strong boundaries. And the thorns remind us of that. The thorns remind us that it's okay to have protection so that we can have our heart open, right? They really work together. Boundaries are supportive, and they're not really a wall. It's really just a container for you to decide how you move in the world and how you can be vulnerable and not take in every single thing that comes your way, right? You don't want to be permeable. You just want to be able to be open-hearted and vulnerable so that you can be in reciprocal relationship with all the other living beings that you experience. Now, the three of these together just work to make this syrup that when you take it, it's like you're grounded and held and your heart opens. It's a wonderful syrup to take if you're going through any kind of grieving transition, if you've suffered a loss of any kind, whether that's a physical death or you're giving death to a pattern or a transition or a life stage, anything like that. This syrup is just so supportive and restorative and nourishing. Like, so those are the themes. And then we have cardamom in there. Cardamom gives it this kind of like spice and circulation, a little bit of warming. Again, it's just this wonderful kind of combination. So with this syrup, you will notice in the recipe that I switched between ounces, and then I did a volume for the oats. And that's because oats are so light. If I was to be like, oh, we're going to do 2 ounces of oats, it could be this huge amount. So I've switched a little bit between thinking in parts, thinking in ounces. And so I just kind of eyeballed, I was like, well, that's the amount of oats that I want in there. Yeah, so this is one of my, so this is my recipe. If you make it, you're absolutely welcome to make it. But if you decide you're going to sell it, you can credit me. All right, so we are going to pretend that I did my 6 cups of water and all of my plant material. And then we are going to, which one is it? I have to smell them because the one looks kind of like the other. Nope. Don't do what I just did. Label your bottles. Okay. That's what you have to do. You have to promise to label all your bottles. Oh, y'all, it smells so good. That cardamom just gives it this like almost a little tiny bit of dispersion. When you're doing a lot of nervines, like the rose and the linden and the oats, I like to put something in there that's a little bit moving because it moves the medicine through the body. And the cardamom does that. So that little bit of dispersion is not enough to make you feel kind of spacey, but it's just enough to like feel like, oh, that's really moving in my body. It's not just settling in there and staying. How are we at on time? We okay?
7:34.
Okay, great.
But we're on, 5 minutes from the 20.
Sweet, thank you. All right, so we're gonna heat this one up. And then I'm gonna show y'all adding the honey. So just so you can see the amount. So we have our 2 cups, right? And then this is really hot. Where should I put it? I'm gonna add it to this bowl. Then I'm going to use 2 cups of honey. So with the elderberry syrup, I'm going to use 1 cup of honey. It's not a 1-to-1. So I'm going to use 1 cup of honey. It's 1 part honey to 2 parts of the decoction. Okay. This is a little Virginia farm honey from Berryville, not too far. All right, I'm gonna add this. That syrup isn't boiled, so I'm not overly cooking my honey. I like to pull the syrup or the decoction off of the heat before I add honey in. And then I'm just gonna mix it all together. So we started with our 4 cups of water and herbs, right? And then we cooked it down to 2 cups. Then we added 1 cup of the honey. And then we're going to add Brandy. You can use anything. I know sometimes, especially if I'm formulating for clients and I wanted to take a specific syrup, I'll actually use an herbal tincture as the alcohol preservative. And like I do syrups for support for a lot of my Lyme clients, and I like to add a tincture in their syrup that moves lymph. And so that's what I'm like, well, if we're going to put alcohol in it, like we'll kick up the medicine a little bit too, but you don't have to do that. You can just do your Brandy. Now, if you're doing alcohol free and you don't want any alcohol, at this stage, your syrup would be done. You're either going to take it and like kind of like use it up pretty quickly, or you can also freeze it. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll be like, well, just, portion it out into ice cube trays. And then every day you get like an ice cube of your syrup. Easy enough, right? You do have to have access to a freezer and electricity for that to happen. I know some people can it also. So if you have access to that, you can also can it. If you add alcohol, it will stay in the refrigerator for quite some time without fermenting or turning bad. If when you open your syrup, it bubbles and there's any kind of like popping like that, or you're like, that means that it's fermented and it's probably not going to be what you want to have, because I do a lot of fermenting and you want to have a different kind of, not control, because you really can't control fermentation. You want to have a different environment set up to where you're really being intentional with it. Does that make sense? You can't tell me because we're saving questions. So I'm going to put in a 1/4 cup, right? Now, one of the best things I absolutely love is that first little cup of warm syrup. It's like getting the first piece of bread when you've made fresh bread. It's just so good. I love it. Okay, so our syrup is done. I'm going to pour it back into its container. Great funnel. I highly suggest you invest in good stainless steel funnels that aren't plastic for your medicine making. It's just nice when you're running anything hot to know you're not running it through a bunch of plastic. And if you are, and that's what you have access to, it's fine. Don't be absurd. All right, so I know there's a label on it, but can you see? Ooh. So that's your elderberry syrup. Do you see how easy that was? I mean, so easy. I know you didn't really see the amount of time it took to like decoct it, but it works really easily. Okay, so dosage, I do the shot glass method. And so I like going places and I'll just be like, oh, get this shot glass for medicine. And so, if you're acutely sick, I would suggest taking it at least 4 or 5 times a day. And a shot glass is usually about a tablespoon. Kids, you're going to do a little bit less. The dosage is on there. And you're going to do that once a day and preventatively as you're working up to any kind of like cold and flu season. Let's see. All right, we're going to move on to our blood building syrup. And this one is a little bit different in that we are using molasses, and we're not adding any alcohol to preserve it because molasses doesn't ferment at the same rate that the honey does. So that's kind of nice. All of these need to be refrigerated. So
Susanna, we're at 7:40.
Okay,
So,
great.
Perfect time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So the blood building syrup is, I'm going to take some water just a second. The tree frogs are going really crazy here. It's really fun. They decided to come out. It's been a really beautiful day. So we're using our blackstrap molasses because blackstrap molasses is high in iron, and we want to like make every single thing about this syrup as supportive for building blood as possible. So this syrup is the one that you want to take if you are experiencing, as herbalists, you can't diagnose. So say you went to an herbalist after you received a diagnosis of anemia and you wanted to have some herbal support for walking through that. An herbalist would be able to look at you and be like, oh, you have low blood, but kind of like doing some different diagnostic stuff, looking at your tongue, looking at your sclera on your eyes, and doing different kinds of energetic looking stuff like that. Now, everybody remember that if you are anemic, anemia is a symptom, it's not a diagnosis. And so you always want to find out why you're anemic, because there can be some very serious issues and reasons. And so I really strongly encourage you that if you're like experiencing any symptoms of anemia, go get it checked out and rule out anything that could be potentially more serious, and work on building blood at the same time. But sometimes you can build blood all you want, but there needs to be a different approach being taken because of what is actually causing the anemia. So I just want to kind of say that. Again, we're using 6 cups of water because we wanted more plant material in here. Now, one of the main kind of like foundational ones in this syrup is yellow dock root, Rumex crispus, and I love yellow dock so much. It's such a bitter plant, but it's so cool because the root is yellow dock, and sometimes it's known as curly dock, and it gets these super beautiful curly leaves, and it puts up this spike, and the seeds turn this rust color in the fall. And you can know how old a yellow dock plant is by counting the rings like you do on a tree. And it's that root medicine we're going for. It's in the class of plants that are bitters. And so it has this incredible reaction and interaction with our digestive system and our liver function. And so all the bitters overarching act in one way, and then within them they differentiate out. So I want this bitter for that, or this bitter for that. So bitters work by, you taste them, you have to taste that medicine. And they work by hitting those bitter taste receptors on your tongue, which then sends this signal that starts releasing gastrin and pepsin in the stomach and preps the body to release bile. It helps stimulate the function of the liver and secretions. And so you're processing your hormones better, you're processing like stuck liver chi, which can result in kind of like rising anger. All Nervies have, all bitters have a nerving component to them, and they all have a downward kind of energy, and they're cooling. Now, what makes yellow dock a little bit special with its bitter is it is high in iron, and it helps your body absorb iron. The one thing that yellow dock does have is it's high in a constituent called anthraquinones, and that can have a laxative effect. And so you want to be careful and not have too much yellow dock, especially if a person is pregnant, because anthraquinones being in that laxative can stimulate peristalsis. And so that contraction of the colon can stimulate contraction of the uterus. And you don't want to do that unless you do want to do that and you're like late in pregnancy, which is why people do like castor oil drinks. But we're not going to do that. You can take this syrup in pregnancy in smaller doses. So I've had people that have been severely anemic that needed this, and we just keep an eye on them. And so the interesting thing about yellow dock is in larger doses, it's a laxative, and in too much doses, it can cause diarrhea. In drop doses of tincture, it stops diarrhea, which is really fantastic when you look and see how like the intelligence of a plant and how that's working in the body. And I've seen it happen over and over when somebody's had some kind of stomach virus and it seems like they just can't stop having diarrhea. It's like they're kind of all better. I'll give a couple of drops of yellow dock and it stops the diarrhea. So I think that's pretty cool. So again, we're using yellow dock because it's got the iron in it, right? And it helps your body also with iron. Then we're adding nettles, Urtica dioica, and nettles, wow, it's one of those desert island plants. Like if you had to pick one, nettles is food, it is medicine, every single part of the plant is used in some way medicinally. And we're talking about the leaf right now. And it's really helps your body get through. It's an adaptogen, and which means that it helps your body adapt to times of prolonged stress without a lot of like excess damage. So it helps with giving you deep resilience. It helps with giving you energy when your energy is incredibly just depleted. It works really well with the waters of the body. It's really, again, it's high in vitamins and minerals. It's high in iron. It is supportive, and anemia and low blood can cause you to feel so deeply exhausted and so tired. And nettle can really help that. Gives you energy over time. And so it's not like a stimulating energy, it's an actual restorative energy that tends to last, and it broadens your whole scope of function. And then to counteract the kind of anthraquinone or potential griping that can happen with the yellow dot, I like to add fennel, which is Feniculum vulgare. And fennel is a carminative, which means it relaxes the smooth muscles of the digestive tract to allow any kind of colicky gas pains to go away, and also to like relieve gas and let it be more easier to expel. So it works nicely in tandem with the yellow dot. Now here's the only thing is it makes this syrup taste like old-fashioned black licorice. A lot of people don't like that. So you definitely want to check to be like, well, do you like black licorice? Because it doesn't matter how incredibly wonderful the medicine is if it's something that nobody's going to take. There's no point to it, right? So you always want to make sure that your protocol is something somebody can do and that the flavor is something somebody's going to do. That's when I check on. If they're like, I hate the taste of licorice, then what I'll do is I will put an aged orange peel in place of the fennel, or even a little catnip in place of the fennel. So we are going to follow the recipe on here, right, which is 6 cups of water. So we're actually using 3 ounces of our dried plant material, and then on top of that I added some nettle leaves. So I did put a little bit more than the 3 ounces, and that's okay because we're rule breakers. We make our own formulas. So again, it's the same process, right? We have our water, we have our plant material, we measured with our chopstick, we're slowly decocting, and then we're going to strain out the plant material. Here's the thing, when you strain your plant material out, find a place to give it back to the earth. Don't put that plant material in the trash. Don't put it down your garbage disposal. If you live in the middle of a city, find a tiny patch. There's plants everywhere in the city that would appreciate some kind of nourishment. And that is a step in honoring the gifts that you're receiving of the medicine from those plants. It's really important. It's important what you think about when you're making medicine. It's important the environment. It's important that you do all of this in the idea that your hands are being of service to work and have healing come through them. Right? The healing that these plants have to offer is coming through you through this medicine. So it's like show up in a really good way with it. And that's what sets people's medicine apart. It's the heart, it's the spirit, it's the intentionality, and it is really understanding that we are in this relationship, right? Very, very important. I can't really stress that enough. The other thing in our blood building syrup you'll see is we're using sumac again. Now, sumac is super cool. So here we used it in our antiviral syrup for its, astringent properties, for its really helping to ease the flu and cold symptoms. But what sumac also does is it stimulates the kidneys to produce erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is this really important part of building red blood cells in the bone marrow, right? So here we have, sometimes there's kidney deficient anemia, and what this does is it helps work with that, right? So it's really helping that kind of like foundational base to be like, well, we want more red blood cells. It's going to help create that. Very cool. And so this is the syrup that you're going to have, if you've been in an accident where you've lost a lot of blood. This is going to be post childbirth. This is going to be after surgery, any kind of blood loss. If there's anybody who bleeds really heavily, this is a great one to just have on hand. And I have seen people have their low blood just completely turn around by working with the issues of why the heavy period is happening, but also then coming in and building blood with this syrup. It's really similar to one that you'll find in the marketplace called Floridix, which is pretty expensive. And so it's nice to be able to have your own. And that's the thing about syrups. You make your own, you can take as much of it as you actually need. It's very good. So here's another pro tip. If you're trying to heat your syrup up, turn the burner on. That's worth the class, right? Just for that one alone. So our Nourishing Nervine syrup wasn't actually heating up because I didn't turn the burner on, but it is now. So we're going to heat up our blood building syrup also. Now you'll notice one thing that's a little bit different also is I'm adjusting the honey on some of these syrups. So if you look at the antiviral, it was 1 part honey to 2 parts syrup, which equals out to be 1 cup of honey and 1 cup of, and 2 cups of syrup. When you start getting into like roses and linden and oats, the syrup is actually just sweeter. And so if you added that much honey, it is just overpoweringly cloying and sticky sweet, and it doesn't taste very good. So I pull back on the honey and I'll put like 3/4 of a cup. So I'm pulling it back by 1/4. And I just experiment around with that. So if I've formulated something new, I'll start on the low end of honey and then I'll add in. I know 3/4 of a cup for every 2 cups of syrup. That's enough to preserve it. That's enough to make it thick. That's enough for it to feel that good kind of like, hitting the mucous membranes and just kind of be really yummy and delicious. That's enough still. But you don't want it to be like, again, where somebody's just like, wow, that's too sweet. I just don't want it. Let's see. What else do I want to say about syrups? I think that's good so far. I want to add the honey and add, so I said we're using the blackstrap molasses because it's high in iron, right? Something that's really good is if you're anemic is make blackstrap molasses gingerbread. It's medicinal, so you kind of have to really just know that your herbalist said that it's important to have blackstrap molasses gingerbread if you're not feeling well. With dark chocolate and walnuts, it's important. Okay, so this is heated up enough. That. And we'll pour it in here and see how much we have. I'm going to spill it apparently everywhere first. Wow, I just made a horrible mess. Like everywhere. Don't do what I did. But if you do, it's okay. So we have 2. So almost, we're at like 2.5. It should be at 3. If you wanted it to be exactly that, because we have decocted it down and it was only a 1/2 cup, if you were like, wow, I really wanted it to be 3, you could add 1/2 cup of water. It'd be totally fine. I'm not going to, because it doesn't matter. And so we have 3 cups. We'll do like 3/4. We'll do 1 cup of honey. Okay. And just get creative. You can make, fever reducing ones. You can make elderflower, catnip syrups. You can make a lavender. You can decide you're just going to make a delicious, wonderful one out of, boy, I was just in the garden today and the lavender is so beautiful. So you can do an elderflower lavender syrup. Just all kinds of delicious things. It's so fun. I love it. And it's nice if people aren't used to herbal medicine. It's a nice way to be like, here, have some medicine and it tastes really good, because there's something about, not feeling well and then you have to take yuck medicine, And sometimes people think all herbal medicine has to taste really bad. You know, not everything has to be golden seal and wormwood, right? Okay. So we have that. That's going to be our 4 cups. And then I'm going to add the brandy. And I'm going to do about 1/3 of a cup just to make sure. Add that in there. Stir it around. Put it in my jar again. I wish y'all could taste this so much. I hope that each of you goes home and makes something from this, because it's just, I don't know, pick one thing. When I was first learning plant medicine, and always learning, perpetual student, that's one thing I love about plant medicine, you never stop learning. When I would go to workshops or conferences or classes, and it could be so overwhelming when you're learning so much, I would say, I'm going to do one thing. I'm just going to incorporate one thing. And then the next time, once you get used to it, you just incorporate another thing. And you just keep doing that until you've built up kind of a rhythm. And, you know, where it's like, oh, making syrups feels good. Oh, I formulated my own syrup. That's awesome. Okay, now I'm going to do this. Or, you know, I remember when I first started doing nettle infusions. And I just did that for months, and how life-changing it was. It was one thing. You just pick one thing. Nothing has to be overwhelming. You don't have to get there right away. Being an herbalist is a journey for the rest of your life. And it's awesome. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful syrup. Which I've lost the, there it is. Okay. So then we're going to add our, mix that up, and then we're going to add our molasses to our blood building syrup. I'm so used to asking if people have questions while I'm doing this stuff, but I know we're okay on time, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we're good. We have a few more minutes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to mix this. Now, if I was making these syrups, and I would not be just rinsing. Like, I know I'm just going to take these home; they're not going to go anywhere. But if I was making these and I was going to be packing them up for clients or for sale or anything like that, I would not just be rinsing that measuring cup or just rinsing the strainer. I would be making sure that there wasn't going to be any kind of like cross medicine contamination. That's important. So I just wanted to say that that's a little cavalier. I know I'm just going to be taking this home kind of attitude that I'm doing. Okay. So this one decocted down a lot. This is only 2 cups, right? And so this one I am going to use the 1 part to 1 part. So we are using the same proportion that we use for our elderberry syrup. So I'm just going to do 1 cup. I love molasses. It's so good. You could use, like, I wonder if sorghum, I haven't looked into like iron and sorghum. I should look into that. I love sorghum too. We can grow sorghum here. I have some friends that have a farm and they grow sorghum, and then they have mules that they use to run the mill. I guess I don't really know the right word for it. But then they make their own sorghum, and it's beautiful. Sorghum's a lot like molasses, but I don't know if it has the same iron content, but I'm going to find out. And if any of y'all find out before me, let me know. This is such a thick syrup, like it's just rich. we will pour this in. Now this is one that you would just take once a day, like a tablespoon. Even if somebody is very anemic, you're not really going to take more than that. You would find other iron-rich foods or stuff like that. What I like about this is so many of the iron supplements that people get can be very constipating and really hard on the digestive system. And this is not that. This, you're not going to have those same things. I can't tell you the amount of people that are like, well, I started doing it, but I didn't like the way it made me feel. And so then they stop, and then they're just not building their blood back up. So it's really, really good that it doesn't have that effect, and it's still doing the work. All right, so that one's all good to go. Just imagine that you're tasting warm syrup, old-fashioned licorice. It's super delicious. So that is a really kind of like quick and dirty overview of syrup making. And I just really encourage you to make some. Just go home, or if you're already home, but just get what you need and make some syrups, and then get really creative with it and experiment. And what's the worst that's going to happen is if you experiment, it's awful, you compost it. It's okay. It's okay to mess up. I learn more from my mistakes than I do from all the times I get it right. So just remember that mistakes are a gift and important part of growth. All right, so we're good for questions now.
Awesome. Great. I have questions lined up from folks. And if anybody else has more questions, just add them to the chat. Our first question is, if using, so this is with the elderberry syrup, if using fresh or dried berries, if using fresh berries, is the quantity adjusted, and what would that be?
So with fresh berries, I tend to do equal parts berry to equal parts water. And then when you're straining it out, you just want to be careful that you're not getting a lot of the seeds in there. So you're going to kind of like, when you cooked it down slowly and you're straining out, you're going to mash those berries through a mesh strainer to get more of the juice out, just to make sure that you don't have. So for elder specifically, I do like a 1-to-1. So I'll do like 2 cups of fresh berries to 2 cups of water, or 4 cups of fresh berries to 4 cups of water.
Awesome. Someone's asking, would it matter if we soaked the plant material in the water before doing the decoction? Would that make any kind of difference?
I know some people that make their decoction by, they like make a tea and steep it overnight and then decoct it, and that's how they like to do it, but I don't think it makes any appreciable difference in the actual medicine.
Great. Will the Nervine syrup help with neurological conditions?
That's a really big question that I don't think I can answer, because neurological conditions is really big. But what it can do is it can support you as you journey through having neurological conditions. So that would be a more specific question, which might take up a little bit more. And that person is always welcome to shoot me an email, and maybe I can be of more support when we have more time.
Great. There's a couple of questions about celiac and gluten sensitivity and milky oats.
That's a big one, actually, and it's very real. And one of my long-term apprentices was helping run the oat harvest, and she had a really intense allergic reaction. So I really suggest that you check in with that, because I definitely know people that have had more than one that have had that kind of like reaction. So be careful with that. You can always leave the oats out and add alfalfa, or you can add just double the amount of linden and rose to it if you don't want to have the oats in it.
Awesome. The person also asked, could they use nettles instead?
Yeah, it won't taste very good, but you totally could.
Someone's wondering, they had heard or were taught that milky oats needed to be fresh to get the Nervine effect. Do you find that to be
No, it needs to be fresh if you're tincturing it, but you absolutely get the Nervine effect in your tea dried. This doesn't extract an alcohol in the same way, but water is the universal solvent. So it's like water is extracting minerals, vitamins, glycosides, alkaloids. It's extracting everything. So think of water as kind of like, just if you think universal solvent, it pulls everything out, and it doesn't have to be fresh. And actually, this is something that I learned from Phyllis also. In terms of tea, I've had the experience of having dried plant material in my tea that I had always been taught could only be fresh medicine, skullcap being one of them, and really having an incredible experience of having strong medicine. And so I think that some of these fresh only kind of goes for our alcohol extracts, but not so much for our tea, which tea is a lot, it has such a longer history, especially in Appalachia, of being used in that way.
Yeah. Well, let's see, what is next on my list? Oh, someone missed the part about why anise was used instead of cinnamon.
Oh, star anise just kind of ups the antiviral property. It's where some of the ingredients for Tamiflu, which is a flu pharmaceutical, comes from. And so I'm like, well, let's just put the star anise in it. And so it kind of ups the immune part of the syrup.
And it's delicious.
Yeah, super good, right?
Can Linden be used with people who have low blood pressure?
Yes, I do not think that Linden has an effect on low blood pressure. Whenever you're doing any kind of herbs, though, always have some way of monitoring your blood pressure so that you don't drop anything. I just encourage that.
Great. Someone's wondering specifically in the antiviral syrup, what type of tincture would you use if you were using tincture instead of brandy?
Oh, I would do something that, well, you could do a whole bunch of stuff. You could use like a reishi tincture, which is another deep immune. You could use calendula, which I like because it's like moving lymph. Sometimes I'll do echinacea. Those are the ones that I would like think of. Red root might be a good one too.
That all sounds so delicious. This class is great. I'm like, I don't know if anybody else is like, I feel like I'm like getting hungry. I'm like,
When I started talking about gingerbread, I was like, oh, that would be good. We could have like our herbal syrup. We do a movie night at the apprenticeship where we watch the Juliet of the Herbs, which is such an awesome documentary about Juliet de Berck and Levy, and then we make herbal treats. And so we'll have like herbal popcorn and chai and candies with powder in it. And I'm like, I think I'm gonna make herbal gingerbread because that sounds really good. I'm not obsessed with gingerbread, I swear, y'all. More questions?
Yeah, there are more.
Yes.
You have a favorite brand of brandy?
You know what? I use Christian Brothers brandy. I try and actually keep my medicine costs low so that I can have a low cost apothecary. So I'll use Christian Brothers.
Great. When's the best time of year? So this is a two-part question because two people asked this. When is the best time of year to harvest yellow dock root? And this person's yellow dock has already gone to seed and has dried up and is brown, and can they harvest it now in the summer? So two-part.
So the best time to harvest root is when in the fall, when all of the energy of the plant has gone from producing leaves, producing flowers, and it's gone back into the root. And so I like fall before the first frost. So even though that plant has already gone to seed and it's brown, everything is still energetically up. We're still in major growth. We just hit the first day of summer. We haven't even hit late summer, which is when everything kind of comes to fruition in terms of like abundance. So even though, yes, that plant looks like it's finished its cycle, the over kind of like arcing energies of the season that we're in, it's still up. So you want it to be downward. You want that fall energy when it's back in the roots. So that's my answer.
Great. I have a question here about coffee and anemia. Would you recommend not drinking coffee if anemic?
You know, you could probably drink like a cup and it's fine, but I know like black tea and coffee can, like, I think it's, and I might not be getting this right, I might not be remembering it correctly, but I think they kind of inhibit iron absorption. I know that the black tea does. I'm not 100% sure about coffee though.
Okay. Someone has a specific question. Do you have any herbs that are amenagogues you would recommend adding to the blood builder specifically for amenorrhea?
I don't think I would add an amenagogue to the blood builder because that's just going to increase blood flow, but like that would be a whole different thing. You know, I think of like amenorrhea, of working with motherwort is a really good herb. Ocotillo can be really good, and a really nice mugwort ginger oil used on your abdomen can be good, along with some castor packs and abdominal massage. Abdominal massage is awesome, but that's a big question too, because it's you really clinically, I would be asking more specific questions as to what's actually going on. I don't tend to work in like this herb for that kind of a thing, but those are some starting places for you to look into and then figure out what's going on.
Good. Someone's wondering if you could freeze milky oats to use later instead of drying them. Like if you had, I'm assuming if you had them fresh.
Well, you're going to be using them fresh in a tincture, so I would just tincture them. And you can do a vinegar or an alcohol tincture, but then you just want to dry them for tea. They don't have to be fresh for tea. So I'm not sure how they would freeze. I've never done that. Don't really have an answer, but I don't fully see the why of needing to either, because you would just make a tincture and then it would just last forever.
Great. I think that unless I missed a question, if I missed your question, I think that's it. If I missed your question, just throw it back into the chat. But otherwise, I think we're good.
Thank y'all so much for being here. Have fun making medicine.
Oh, wait, there is one.
Okay.
And we do have one more minute. I think this might be another specific one. Herbs to help with hot flashes and menopause other than Black Cohosh for someone with a heart condition. This might be an email question.
With somebody that has a heart condition, hot flashes. I don't, that's probably a bigger question that I could safely answer, just because if you get into like heart medicines and herbs can have some interactions. Hot flashes, boy, they can be rough. So what I would suggest you look into and find a little bit more information about would be motherwort. I'm not recommending it because I don't know more about your situation, but that's a plant you could do some research yourself on.
Great. And someone was asking about canning them, which you did answer. And I just want to make sure that the person asking heard, yes, you can can the syrups.
Yes, but I don't think you can water bath them. They need to be like pressure canned.
Oh, that's good to know. Pressure canned.
Yeah, I think water bath canning is only going to be good for stuff that's more acidic. And I think everything else you need to like have the pressure canner for it. So yeah, if you have that.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Thank you. There's like all these like awesome and thank yous coming in the chat. I don't know if you can see them, but they just keep flowing in. Thank you so much. It was so great to be your host, and
thank you.
It was such an inspiring and awesome class.
I'm glad to be here.
I think I speak for everybody. I loved it, and everybody is loving it in the chat here.
You guys, that's great. If you have questions, shoot me an email, check out my website, and see you soon. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.